Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the BIA Knowledge Leadership Series webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Should you wish to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Thursday, January 21st, 2015. I would now like to hand the call over to Robin Thompson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Kayla. Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Thompson, and on behalf of BIA, we want to welcome you to the kickoff of our 2016 Knowledge Leadership Series webinars, where our guest expert will talk today about establishing corporate discovery units. Just a few reminders, as Kayla said, please send your questions through the chat window, and we'll reserve some time at the end of the program to answer those. Secondly, would like to let everyone know that all attendees will receive a certificate of attendance, which is good for self-reporting or other types of CPE. As of this time, we do not have CLE offered on our programs. And lastly, our programs are planned directly from exit surveys, and we thank you in advance for helping us to improve the quality of our programs. And as a reward, those who answer the survey today will get a copy of today's presentation. Now it's my favorite part to turn the program over to our presenter. I discovered Ben through his wonderful blogs on LinkedIn, and if you haven't read them, I highly encourage you to add them to your reading list. Ben, I'd like to turn this over to you so you can tell the folks a little about yourself and talk about how we establish corporate discovery units.
Thank you so much, Robin. So I'll just, before I start, just note that all this chat and discussion is, these are my own thoughts and not the official policy or position of LinkedIn. So I'll just give a little background on how I even got into e-discovery. I started in my younger teenage years just doing web dev and computer repair, and then eventually when I got into my undergrad, I got a paid internship at the Securities and Exchange Commission. There, and for about 3 years, I supported the discovery, forensics, and litigation support teams dealing with operations, forensic basics, and data loading and troubleshooting for load files into concordance. The SEC got huge volumes of data, and it was probably the worst quality of productions I've ever seen, and took a lot of effort to sort of sift through those to get those loaded. While I was there, I learned a ton about investigations, how the government manages e-discovery through the mega contract, contractors, and how the internal litigation support deal with all that huge intake volume. And then, of course, tracking and the culture of that world, which is not great. Then I moved to Jenner & Block, the law firm, for about 5 years. And while I was there, Jenner was one of the firms that went through one of those big discovery adjustments where they offloaded their department to refocus on what they provided in core. And I was one of the sole folks left there to manage the DC and New York offices as both a case manager and data manager. And during that time, I was just finishing my master's in forensic science at GW, and there was less research and development going on there. It was just not as challenging, so I eventually left and joined Pricewaterhouse. While I was there, I spent the next 2.5 years with a fellow named Eric Dirk building the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's end-to-end e-discovery strategy from litigation support, CID data requests, participating in meet and confers, tool selection, FOIA collections, executive education on e-discovery, intake tracking and playbooking, and as they brought on their own staff to sort of carry it on and move it forward, I left because I got picked up by LinkedIn. And LinkedIn found me through LinkedIn, and was lucky enough to take this role, this new role here, and it was to help create a new discovery program, and then it's eventually turned into a governance initiative as well. Here, I'm housed under legal, report into litigation and compliance. And we have the whole EDRM in-house. We leverage a couple tools, EnCase, Relativity, Hanzo to deal with forensics, document review, processing, data preservation, and targeting. As my role here, I manage it's just me. I manage the virtual machine health through SQL, operating the tools, providing the consultation, forensic analysis, and through this experience is how I was able to sort of come up with this sort of subject matter that we hope to chat about today. So.
Great, Ben. I'll just take a couple of seconds. I'm not sure if Robin mentioned me. This is Brian Schrader. I'm the president of BIA, just kind of here as well as moderator and to help just give a broader example of some of my experience as well, wherever Ben thinks that might help. But the interesting thing I find is that a lot of people who got into the industry got here the same way that you did, and my path was similar, where it was a technology at a very young age that kind of developed into this. I don't think that was at a time where nobody looked at e-discovery, or nobody as a child said, I want to be an e-discovery professional, because it didn't exist. So I always find it interesting, and I think that kind of really sets the stage to help us go through your experience and how that's changed and how it pulls together to show how you would now go about building and how the recommendations you give to other people about building that kind of corporate internal team. So the background stuff is great, and I think it really lays that foundation to show that you've had every kind of experience there. Government, law firm, private company, consultant. I think a lot of that really blends well together, and I think people will see as we go through the presentation, it gives you a much more rounded experience instead of just coming from one particular place or the other. But anyway, that being said, Ben, I turn it back over to you, and we'll run through the topics.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So the way that I've sort of structured my thinking on this is sort of some history again about why the in-house world has sort of come into its prevalence today, and then we'll walk through some of the initial thinking. That's probably the most important part, and we'll spend probably a little more time there and on structure. And then the people and the process and the technology pieces sort of kind of fit right into its place after that part of the thinking is done. Switch. Yeah, so the history, I think a lot of the reasons why it was the e-discovery in-house became such just an important subject now is due to the inefficiencies of law firms, consultancies, and service provider management of discovery and their billing practices. I think as the big law firms couldn't really make e-discovery a profit center, but rather the departments became more cost neutral or even cost centers, it was often due to the write-offs of e-discovery services and the broader expense of the entire operation. For law firms, I think the updates to the technology over time, training for existing staff, continuously having to grow that infrastructure to put in more machines to make their software work faster and better, the storage just became unwieldy for most. Of course, there's plenty of law firms that got it right, and they're well-to-do for it today. Particularly, I think what a lot of firms and some service providers end up doing to corporations is requiring very broad collections. The broad collections and the large volumes require a lot of culling via the expensive tools. There's charges for OCRing per page, which and storage, which has the cost of storage have adjusted over time because it's cheaper, but it's still a cost that gets passed forward. And then along with expensive and complicated tools require expensive project management time. Project management time comes in multiple tiers from both within the server provider world and then again from the law firm with their own internal litigation support coordinators and then the discovery counsel. So charges sometimes come, double time. and usually they don't have great descriptions. They're often very confusing and poorly written, and that, can irritate, a corporate group that's trying to, manage costs over a litigation or investigation. Additionally, for the corporation, there's oftentimes a lot of data redundancy across matters. If they have matters with several firms, they could be paying multiple times for the same data set as it's leveraged in multiple matters. I think over time, as these, as the big law tides have changed, and they're still in the midst of changing, I think a lot of firms began to recommend, and that's about the time at my end of Jenner, where they began to ask me just to balance, estimates from different service providers to normalize them, and then ask our client to, contract directly with them, and then we would help PM all the technical rigor in between. And I think that's still probably very common today. For the corporation in particular, negotiating with service providers is much more complicated. I think the negotiation with a law firm whose primary service is legal and discovery is somewhat of a byproduct, that's much easier to negotiate into a line item, cross out, and they focus on just paying for the legal services versus versus when you are engaging a service provider, their core service is technology, and they're less likely to be flexible to some extent. And so those discovery costs become very inflexibly real. With all that, I think corporations began to become more savvy, and I think this is probably due to a lot of discovery counsels from firms that are painfully aware of the discovery process, collections and processing and review, and the cycling through that over and over and over again and dealing with the difficulties. They go in-house and they help establish programs, or they're just aware that a program needs to be established. And then I think that, hand in hand with the improvements of enterprise technology, there was an ability to start, bringing more and more in-house to control these costs. But all this to be said, there has to be a strategy in mind to make intelligent procurements, and it has to be based on the unique facets and posture and considerations of an organization. Brian, does that sound similar to what your experience has been as well?
Sure, absolutely. And I think I think the nail you hit the nail on the head there when you talk about technology, especially because the technology and the advancements and as you're seeing discovery solutions being built into tools and the software itself and SaaS applications that don't require huge amounts of internal resources and things like that, you're seeing a lot more. As the industry grows up, the discovery industry, or just really I'd like to call it the discovery industry today, and the tools get better, you're seeing corporations take more control because not only does it help them reduce the cost, but the consistency and leveraging the data and data security and all of that is becoming more and more important. But I think what's really enabling a lot of it is not only, like you said, kind of a realization that there's a better way to do this. Maybe it's not the corporate, or what needs to come in-house versus what needs to stay outside the firewall. And it's really a lot of driven by technology, and without that technology, to make collections easier, to make calling easier, to make review easier, whatever it is, every single one of the areas on the EDRM have made huge strides in the last couple of years. All of which I think makes it much more attractive for corporate clients, especially those corporations that have active litigation profiles, right? I mean, if you've got one case or two cases a year, probably not something you want to dedicate internal resources to. But if you're a company like LinkedIn, who probably gets regular subpoenas on a regular basis and other stuff like that, then bringing it in-house is almost essential to you being able to manage that process and not be gobbled or eaten alive by it. And I think that's really what's driving a lot of the companies is all the issues on your list, and what really comes into it is costs. But costs alone can't drive it. if the technology solutions aren't there. You're seeing Google and the rest of them kind of build some of this stuff in. We'll talk about that in a bit. I think that's, you've hit the nail on the head on a lot of those things.
Great. So let's strategy. So the initial thoughts. I think in the spirit of pithy, my core belief, and probably I hope what everyone takes away from this presentation, is I believe that corporations should focus on their methods for preservation, whether it's in place or via acquisition, how they're collecting from all their different systems, and managing early case assessment so that they can execute some data reduction. I think that's the primary goal of the department, and hopefully it's a part of the larger governance strategy. But of course there are several considerations when it comes to figuring out how to right size the amount of EDRM tech and people for your org. So there's a series of questions, I think, that are probably very obvious considerations and low-hanging thoughts, but helps frame the thinking to either improve your current ecosystem or building a new one. I put the more complicated questions first because I think they sort of divide the sort of circumstances and the type of thinking that has to happen. The first and most important one is whether or not this business is in a regulated industry, oil and gas, finance, supply chain, telecom, utilities, heavy compliance requirements that have to be understood. That also dictates the technology and the process and procedures to that have to be adhered. It's a whole different game. The age of the company I also find to be interesting because that also separates circumstances. I find that the older the company, there's frequently siloed business units, there's a complicated political atmosphere, there's old litigation, there's old systems, there's backups that are living in Iron Mountain. It's also often that the leadership doesn't value this type of investment into discovery or security or governance, and a great deal more convincing is necessary, and often help is needed, usually via consultants. The easiest question is the complexity and average duration of matters. Those are easily quantifiable. It helps justify costs, and that at least gives you a base for what what current budget is looking like. I think the probably the more fun part, but a very important piece of this is what the world of your internal data stores look like internally. Knowing what systems that house relevant corporate data and product data are within your org just can describe really what the landscape of complexity you're going to be dealing with. How you're dealing with email and how you're archiving it, if you're archiving it, your network storage, your cloud storage, chat, wiki, data loss prevention, content management systems, backup. Understanding what your product is and effectively how its sausage is made, whether it's what the science is behind fracking and how that's stored, or financial products, or a great website. Data can live in policies and proprietary databases, source code. Whether you're housing sensitive PCI or PII or PHI, where employment data lives, whether it's in paper, and whether this data is stored domestically or internationally. All this is important because it helps define the amount of effort and time it takes to gather this info and export it from systems. It's invariably more complicated than anyone expects, and riddled with problems and bugs that usually have to be worked out long in advance so procedures are established. And defensible collections, of course, require forensics at times. And how to apply preservations for the holds. All these things have to be considered because it really paints a picture of how complex it will be to manage these processes internally, and finding the right people to manage these processes and the right technologies that will help sort of polish your technology landscape. So it's not just as simple as buying document review products or processing engines or forensic tools. It's really also about sort of the unique needs that your business has and how difficult it will be to gather it, so you also know your own burdens, because those burdens will most assuredly be required at some point when you have to draft a burden statement.
And I'll just say, this is one of the things that we talk a lot about in so many of our presentations. Kind of start out with something similar to this, which is, this idea of, if you're going to go down this path and you really want to look at building your own internal team and you really want to look at controlling your costs, you can't jump into the middle of it. And I've seen the difference between companies who really take a serious look at all of these questions that you're bringing up, which are great, and create a committee of the right people, right? Bringing in the right, not just IT, but legal and HR and others who feed into this, and maybe compliance, like you had mentioned before. But spending that time at the outset, it sounds so simple, but it's something that I see so many companies not do when they do e-discovery. They just think they could buy a piece of software or hire a professional to come in and take over their e-discovery. It doesn't work that way, or it doesn't work very well that way. I think if you really want to control your process, which thereby then controls your costs, you have to take a holistic approach. You have to be looking at answering these questions. Where are all your systems? What are the technologies? What's the best solution for us? And I think bringing in outside people, whether it's law firms, experts, consultants, whatever, to give you an idea not only of what, given an outsider's view, but I think it's also important, and I think you probably brought this to LinkedIn, given where you were right before that, knowing what everybody else is doing, right? How's everybody else solving this problem? And that's something only an outsider can do. And I think, just wanted to throw in there that I think these, getting these kind of questions up front, spending a lot of time really understanding and asking the right questions, and then sitting down and figuring out what the right solutions are. Because, frankly, and coming from the services world, I want people to hire us to do everything, right? Because I want the business, just like everybody else does. But I also have a practical side that when I sit down with a new client, and we talk about what solutions are best, there are clients where, doing a big portion of this stuff internally and having their own software and solutions and whatever is the right solution, and we back that 110%. There are other clients where doing any of it in-house isn't. And so a lot of the big question comes down to answering these questions and figuring out, if you really want to control your costs before you do it, coming up with a clear plan and having a very good understanding of what's there inside your organization. Otherwise, you kind of walk into these situations, you're going to end up implementing stuff that either makes your process more complicated and therefore more expensive, or you're going to be entirely frustrated forever, spinning your wheels trying to solve a problem without having all the pieces to solve the puzzle. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, that's dead on. I think one experience I can share is that I think organizations have the knowledge sort of fragmented in-house. I think there's an IT department that understands what their landscape of tech is, and a lot of information about those individual systems. It's rare that one person has all that knowledge, right? And so as a org looking to develop this sort of expertise, it's really starting with that group and help aggregating that information about the landscape of systems and whether it's centralized or federated, where everything lives, and sort of interesting knowledge about it. That's where those details will be gathered, and that sort of lends itself into the steps down the road where you can find your people that can help operate this, how to structure it internally, and then the processes, of course, will naturally support all that too. But again, my takeaway from this is that managing how you preserve and collect and assess that data is probably the most important thing that can happen as a cost-saving measure that just has immediate ROI. That formula I put at the bottom just to clarify it. The simple way to think of it, how much litigation investigations you're experiencing, that footprint, how complex your enterprise is, how much budget you will have for staff and technology, and the amount of expertise that is currently in-house already to help build this really defines how robust the department will be and what makes sense for the org.
Okay. And just one other thing before you jump off this slide, I love the goal of controlling preservation and collections. the vast majority of our experience is with corporate clients. We just have always been focused more on the corporate side than with law firms, and so we get a little bit more intimate is probably not the right word, but we get a little more intimate with our corporate clients than most providers, and we see a lot of this stuff. And having been in the industry for nearly 15 years now, I can say that without a shadow of a doubt, that one bullet point is the single most important thing in controlling your e-discovery costs: collection, control, preservation, and collections. Because it's like anything else, anything in any process. The sooner you can apply controls in the process, the better. Right? And I think one of the biggest things that has come up in the industry is finally the industry is moving away from doing full disk imaging for everything and moving to targeted collections. And and that in and of itself means the difference between collecting 200 gigs for a custodian versus 10 gigs for a custodian. The more you can control that, how much data you're collecting. Of course, you always want to make sure you're preserving, and you don't want to go overboard. But if you can get control over your collections and what you're collecting and what you're actually sending out by using some calling features, and again, how much you do is kind of really dependent on budget, appetite, and your workload. The more cases you have internally, the easier it is to justify dedicated resources. But that really, I would say, if people don't take anything else away from this discussion, is that if you want to truly control your costs, it's about controlling the number of custodians, number one. That's the easiest way, right? Getting into the point where you're truly controlling the custodians you have. And then the second part is really controlling the preservation and collections internally. And that's something really we tell all of our corporate clients they should deal with internally is that collection and preservation, because it's something that is early on in the process and a great way for them to be able to save money. So anyway, sorry to go off on a long tangent on a 4-sentence or 4-word sentence, but I think that's so important to controlling costs in the company.
Yeah, no, and it reminds me that two things, that outside counsel, they always, they have the best interest in mind, but they're also, trying to protect their risk or manage their risk when they request for very broad collections across many custodians and use, very loose keywords or none at all, or get everything. And that, that also leads into why it's important to sort of know your landscape. The more you know about your own house, the more you come to the table with, and the more you can also curate how you're working with your outside counsel or with outside consultants, and down to very poignant statements of work that you can control better. And then for targeted collections, a term I've been using for that lately is civil forensics, and it's ultra important.
That's a great term, I think, and I think that defines it really well. What we always tell our clients is, look, unless it's a criminal case, in other words, it's a criminal case, or there's a good chance it's going to be a criminal case, then you don't need traditional computer forensics, which at the end of the day, traditional computer forensics, and we started as a forensics company, so it's not like I'm trying to poo-poo forensics at all. I'm not. It definitely has its place. But traditional forensics was created for law enforcement. Hard drive imaging was created for law enforcement. I've never heard somebody use the term, the civil forensics before, but I think that's a great idea, a great thought, a great way to put, who knows, maybe you came up with the next buzzword in e-discovery. You all heard it here first.
Perhaps. It's, deception in employment matters. There's still, traditional forensics is usually important to figure out what's been occurring on somebody's device. Also,
sure, absolutely.
Employment harassment matters, where, deception is a great possibility, where people are trying to cover up their tracks, or, if there's issues with somebody's productivity, and, they've been searching the web or searching, there's all sorts of forensic techniques that are still important. But I think for a lot of cases, when you're dealing with patents, user-generated content is usually what you're looking for, and collecting it defensibly in a forensically sound manner is usually the way. But of course, again, it always leads back to risk mitigation when you have to deal with outside folks. It's in your best interest probably to do a full disk image, so you don't have to pay them again to come back and gather something. It really just depends on circumstances and how you're navigating a matter, and sort of how you're trying to preempt costs down the road, due to your experience. It's really a lot. Sometimes it's just, a gamble on how you're going to approach it. But new technology hopefully will come out soon that will support this sort of civil e-discovery forensic techniques. Moving to structure, I think probably the most common question that is frequently asked on folks within house and outside is where to place the department. And my feeling, since I've been in Silicon Valley and I have a lot of great friends and a lot of companies out here with my counterparts at those companies, it really just boils down to the skills of people and the available resources and which department is interested in housing or budgeting for that team. Management structures can work in a number of ways, and the right answer is really just one where people are happy and they're interested in this subject matter and they're getting great work done defensively. And while I've been in the Valley, I've seen the roles be a series of combinations of technical and less technical attorneys, e-discovery program managers that are also doing legal operations, or they're also doing security and DFIR. They're also doing governance. They're also involved in privacy, or they're litigation paralegals that are very technical, or they're also compliance operators or compliance officers, or there's just every place I've seen, most of the folks have these multiple roles, or people were doing something for a while, and then the need for them to begin to take on these responsibilities just became present, and they were able to take that on, and they've done it well, and because they knew their organization, they knew what systems, they knew the people that operated those systems, they were able to just get shit done. They could go find that person, get the type of content that they needed out of that system. They were able to preserve what information they needed to with the resources that they had, and a lot of times that in of itself is the inception seed that begins to show its own value, and that the ability just to produce results to the senior legal team, the general counsel, or the compliance, wherever it's housed, begins to defend its value. There is no question for me, at least in my opinion, that it's best housed in legal. I think these requests are originating from legal. Legal has to pay for somebody to go execute those requests. Now, if that means that there's some combination of skills that a person already on your team has and engages with engineers within IT to get it done, or you actually hire an engineer to house it within your own legal engineer, then so be that. But I think there's some issues with that as sort of this grows and scales. Due to the urgency and criticality of these requests, oftentimes if you have somebody you're just working with in your IT department, they're having to balance your requests with their sprints. They've probably already tasked with responsibilities that they have to accomplish within the next 2 weeks, within the next month, and then they're sideswiped with these repetitive, urgent requests of them having to dive into Exchange and pull something out, turn it back over to legal reviews and that, and I want to change it again. They go back, and this cycle goes on and on. It can become difficult for that person, especially when they've already had schedules planned. So that has to be discussed sooner than later to understand responsibilities and how that is going to translate for that person, as they're going to get rated against their peers, because then they're also not going to perform as well, or they're not as aware of why this is so important for the legal team, and they're not doing the same potentially challenging things that their peers are in terms of rolling out new technology or upgrading their systems or maintaining it. And as another point, if legal hires an engineer, but that engineer is actually housed in IT, a problem for them also becomes that they're now rated against their peer structure there, however they're titled. And since they're dealing with a series of different tasks, and they also have to engage with their peers within that group, it's going to be hard for that person to sort of push criticality and urgency upon those peers because they're reporting to the same person. They're not going to get preferential treatment just because the attorney teams are asking them to get something done. That's just not reality. It seems like it would be on paper, but they're just a technical person amongst a lot of other great technical people, and there has to be an initial discussion to sort of establish roles and responsibilities. So that's my
I'll just throw in there that I think where I've seen it work most effectively in corporations is when this function is kept under the legal team. And sometimes there may be, like a liaison that's on the IT team as well, but isn't necessarily day-to-day stuff. That all said, I think I've also seen companies where this function is entirely under IT or entirely under the CIO. It depends. I think a lot of it depends on the company and the landscape and what's there to begin with. You got to kind of work within the structure that already exists. And so if you have a kind of company that has a really strong CIO or an IT department or something and not so much of a legal focus, just because of the nature of the company, maybe it makes sense to do something different. But in general, I'd agree with you that where I've seen internal teams work the best, and I don't mean best from a capability perspective, I mean just best from a overall organizational, getting things done inside the organization, is when they're in the legal department, or at least they're tied very closely to the legal department. I think one of the things that I would discourage people to do, where I've seen it happen before, almost every time to a not a complete disaster, but just not work very well, is where you try to create an e-discovery team or person that answers to both legal and IT. I've seen people literally say you've got two bosses, and I think we all agree, I don't care what your profession is, if you're trying to serve two masters, you're never going to be very successful at it, and there's always going to be a struggle there. So that's the one thing I would recommend against. And I would obviously, recommend highly that it get placed under the legal team for everything you said, with the caveat that, of course, it's always dependent on the organization. The only thing I would definitely say don't do is try to split it between multiple teams, because it becomes, it just doesn't work very well. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that before.
The realities are that this is totally what happens. I've seen it with a huge supply chain company that deals with Harrell. You just get put into roles sometimes. The role is created, and if you're going to have a lot of hands on technology and operating on behalf of legal, but you're operating within the technology domain, that org wants to have purview over it as well. And that also sort of brings back to older companies. The older the company is, where there's structures and established folks in place and they've been there for a long period of time, they're just less likely to be flexible about how new departments kind of fall in and who they're going to report into. And that's where these complicated political atmospheres are as well. And that's when you have to bring in consultants to do assessment and education, and so the newer the company, when you have a lot of there's still procedures sort of being fleshed out and discussions are still being discussed and responsibilities are malleable, then which I see a lot in Silicon Valley as well. People tend to, a lot of these companies have grown very fast, grown to a strong size, but and they're sort of in the process of building in governance and structures behind them so they can scale appropriately going forward. It's always easier to talk about these things on paper and chatting, but the realities of what corporate atmospheres are, it's just usually just more nuanced than that can just be simply described. All right, I'll move on to people. Probably an easier subject to discuss. That all people can probably agree. It's just a very tough market to find really good folks. I've written a little article on this one. It's usually bifurcated just because of the way law firms sort of set the tone over time. I think there's senior consultants that know a lot about the life cycle of a matter. They understand how to preempt problems early and educate their attorney teams well so that they can make good decisions early. But those folks may or may not have a lot of technical capabilities within e-discovery products, within forensics, or with this, and arguably probably the most important piece is enterprise technology. This is really where all this magic is. E-discovery is just sort of something that's related to operating, products and understanding information systems. E-discovery in and of itself is nothing. It is gathering that content, preserving that content, knowing how systems manage that content. And it's tough to find people that have some sense of all that. More often you find a lot of individuals with core competencies within each of those domains. And it's not easy to cross-pollinate over time. Most firms and you get hired to do this role, you're going to be intake for some processing engine like Nuix or Clearwell or Prediscovery Law or iPro, whatever, and that's what they do for an extended period of time. They have to get lucky enough to get hired into a service provider that is interested in growing their staff and giving them cross-pollination and watching how they support matters, or you get into a firm that maybe is also very supportive. A lot of the people that have a lot of the information management skills come from corporations, or they have some technology experience and from other places, and they can begin to tie all those things together. So really, I think when if I ever one day get to hire people here, the things that I look for, where I think are great qualities in people that I've met over time, they really understand the discipline of litigation and investigation support. They know how to run their review tools really well. They know how to run their processing engines. They understand those products. They understand forensic academics. They technical administrators as well. They understand how those products work. And even for e-discovery attorneys, I often find that they have a lot of they know of it because they've been communicated to about it, but they're also very disconnected from the technology hardships themselves. Not always, but that's just frequently the case. Most people will sit on panels and have these robust discussions about things that they've more often never done. They understand what needs to happen to get through matters, and they're really good at it. But the real gravity of how complex these products are to operate and maintain and on-go requires some time and effort to manage. I think understanding a computer. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you a quick question about kind of if anybody on the call is looking at building an internal team. You kind of went through some of the things to look for and to think about, and it is definitely hard, largely because it's still, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively young industry, so you just don't have the 30-year history of people to go through. Discovery's obviously been around that long, but e-discovery really hasn't, if we're honest with ourselves.
Sure.
And so I think that has to do a lot with the bench. But I'm just curious, from your take, I know what my opinion is from what I've seen, but if you're looking at building a team internally, if you were, let's say, brought into LinkedIn and there nothing existed, right, and you just were building a team completely by yourself, when you go to look for people to be on your team, to me, I think it's more important to look for people that come from places either inside of a law firm or inside of a vendor. And their experience, to me, means is kind of important if you're building something from scratch, for the simple fact that they will have had more exposure to how a number of different companies and organizations handle internal needs. Where if you go with somebody who just has a kind of a corporate background only, especially if it's just one corporation, you might be pigeonholed. And so I think, and I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to say anything against it, but I'm just saying for those of you who are looking out at building your own team or thinking about that, the people, especially in the leadership roles, I think you want to look for somebody that has a diverse background. Like Ben, you had you have a beautiful background because you kind of hit every consultant, law firm, corporation, government, the whole 9 yards. So I think that's a great background. I'm just curious for you, when we're talking about people, on the skill set for junior or entry-level people, I don't think it's as necessary to have that broad range, but especially for those who are designing the systems and creating the policies, looking for somebody that the more diverse the background, the better. And I think what a lot of us don't think about is when you think about somebody with a law firm background or a corporate background, and this is something I learned when I was first started doing or practicing law, was it was so interesting to me how much I would learn about the client's business as I went into a case. It might be a contract dispute or something I was litigating, but I would learn everything there was to know about a business, and a lot of times I would learn things that I didn't even know existed. And of course, then again, we live in an industry that if you're not involved in e-discovery, who knows it exists? And so I just think that if you're looking for leadership, if you're looking for somebody to start a team, that's one of the key things that I think really makes a difference is that big kind of diverse background.
Yeah, so I guess I got excited there. One of the things I think about when you're hiring, it really just sort of ends up reeling back to what the current sort of array of skill sets are currently in-house. Like I mentioned before, discovery sort of is born out of someone already there that's doing it, and they have their own skill sets. And it's discovered that they're great at the coordination between a lot of people, but it's a bit onerous for them to begin operating some product that is going to be brought in-house. And you're probably going to be looking at someone who's great at operating that product and products like it. If you have great engineers that are in-house that can operate all these things and you're really happy with how they execute, then it sounds like you probably need someone that has a good technical background but also really understands how litigation support might work. You might need someone in compliance that also, it really is like reality of how hiring probably is thought of. There's a gap in the skill set that needs to be focused on, and then you can sort of shoot for it. And then based on what your culture is and how you want to see them operate, and whether you're interested in certifications or whether you're interested in broad industry knowledge, then you find them. You put a rec out on LinkedIn. You can hire them from LinkedIn.
There you go.
Yeah. So I'll move to process quickly, and then technology. Process is pretty easy. I think of all this, it's a lot of this. I'm assuming most have pre-contemplated this through your strategy. The process is really about documentation. I think that when I see places where somebody's hoarding knowledge and they're just sort of very difficult to share that information about what they've done because they feel like it's a job security, worst case scenario, always worst case scenario, bad culture. Documentation and clarity is the key to defensibility, it's the key to transparency, it's the key to improvement. And if you're concerned that your knowledge is what's keeping you where you are, then that is not what your value is. Your value is because you understand the landscape of your technology and how to do things, and you're open-minded to improving them so you can just operate better. Discovery shops are notoriously very, painful experiences for most, and so, in the interest of warming it for many people that are practicing and working within this very the stressful world that it is, having everything documented so you can follow a path, an escalation path, decision trees, and then particularly for me in-house, what I did was documented how the tools operate, the maintenance, the patch change, upgrading, how I operate legal holds for all the different systems that are internally, what sort of data is there, the sort of bugs and issues that I commonly experience, how long it takes, where data lives, how it lives. A really great person in another big Silicon Valley company taught me a lot about how to track time, so I can also sort of show some return on investment for this group, so they can see sort of what they'd be paying had we been outsourcing it the whole time. She had it nailed down, and I was able to mirror some of it, and it was a great value. So I really just believe that constantly documenting, having a solid playbook, auditing it frequently, providing context, legal hold mapping, just that's the process. That's your documentation, so it can be improved upon over time. And then doing after-action reviews and postmortem,
Yeah, and I'll just throw in there, I think this is, in my experience working with a lot of different companies, the ones that truly take control, create a defensible process, and then at the beginning of a case bring together their internal resources, their external resources, law firms, vendors, whoever, and say, this is our checklist. This is how we do it, and enforce that policy, save unbelievable amounts of money compared to anybody else. Because if you can create a book, and look, every case is going to have nuances, but something as simple as having a standard discovery protocol that is, covers the stuff that you'd expect, from clawback procedures to how collections are going to get done and calling is going to be done and the cooperation and stuff that's going to happen, that kind of standard. We've all seen these probably either in practice or in forms. Having that document that is your base document, that is the default that you use every single time, you'd be surprised how much money you'll save in lawyer fees by preventing somebody from spending a lot of time arguing over that. If you go into a meet and convert and you say, here's our process, here's our protocol, here's how we produce documents, we've done it in 50 cases already, and it's been approved by other courts, the idea of having that repeatable process where it's like an assembly line almost. You know exactly. The corporate customers that we have that get the most out of their money and the most ROI and really control their costs are the ones that have a very clear set procedure. And it may be, they may have 2 or 3 procedures depending on the type of case. But the point is, there's no scrambling. It's just a new lawsuit comes in, great, let's have a kickoff meeting with everybody on it. Here's our process. This is what we're going to do. Here's the protocols we're going to propose. And it's the same exact thing every time. Even if you're dealing with different outside law firms, especially if you're dealing with different outside law firms, it's incredibly important because you get great cost savings by leveraging a single solution and a single process across all your matters. But one thing that a lot of people don't think about is you also gain much better control of your data because you know where it all is if it's always following the same process. And probably even more importantly, the defensibility of your process goes through the roof if you're using the same exact process in every one of your cases.
I just wanted to say, I see a question that came in that says, how do you do this? I think it's probably just helpful to share that there is no program that does it for you. This is just you. You have to begin outlining and documenting using things like Visio or mind map to just show what decision trees look like. There's no other magic to it. Sorry to interrupt.
No. I think that's a good point. And what we do with most of our clients is just develop checklists. And those checklists. And we're actually looking at some technologies around decision trees. Nothing that's geared towards the discovery industry, but stuff that would allow you to kind of fill out a form and figure out what the process is for this particular case. You could do stuff like that if you want to get into it, but like you're right, there's nothing designed for this process. It's about looking for a tool, and whether that's a printed checklist or a custom developed wizard that walks you through the same checklist, only in a prettier format. That's really what it comes down to, and you're right. You have to develop that internally, and it's about getting the right people in the room and making sure all the points you talked about here, going through each one of them, and really, all of this from a big perspective is about planning, right? That's what we're talking about. Everything we've talked about so far is about creating a team, planning a team, doing all of this stuff. We focus more on that because that's the secret to everything, especially if you're in a company that has repeat litigation or a regular litigation profile. It's, if you have a set plan and you've really spent time doing it, I'm not talking about spending a year doing a huge analysis. I'm talking about just getting the right people in a room, having a couple of meetings, and then once you have that plan, that group comes back and meets 2-3 times a year just to review it and make sure nothing's changed. It doesn't take an enormous amount of time. It'll take more time to get set up, but once you've got it running, I think, and Ben, you can tell me your experience, but I've found that once corporations spend that probably couple of months putting together their plan and really seriously bringing in the outside parties, so they get buy-in from their outside counsel, they get buy-in from the vendors, they get buy-in from their IT, from their legal, from compliance, from everybody. Those are the people who end up looking at e-discovery like it's not a big problem. It's just a part of the normal everyday work. But anyway.
Yeah, it also adds to the growth. So our last subject is technology. Another seemingly more complicated one, but it's just, the landscape of tools out there, whether you're dealing with service providers for some part of it. But again, it's the same theme I've been talking about. Get the things that help you collect, preserve, analyze, and reduce. The priority. The in-house world is becoming more and more complicated because the new age of collaboration suite technologies like HipChat and Slack and Box and Drive, they don't have great compliance technology because they hit the freemium market first. Everyone, privacy is so concerning for everyone, but privacy is not a concern within a corporation. Once it becomes an enterprise product, they need to have those features built in for discovery, search, preservation, legal hold. And sometimes you have to buy technology. That's why I got Hanzo. Hanzo is a great product that I use internally that helps preserve URL-based products. A lot of these companies like Slack and HipChat, some of them have not hit this enterprise level. Like Box is only releasing their, suite of discovery, features later this year. Microsoft Office 365 only released the Discovery Center this year, with the release of O365. Google Vault's good, but all these things are still sort of young, and they need features built in and flexibility built in to help improve that. But a lot of these collaboration suite technologies, if you're in-house, you have to let them know that you need these features because those requirements aren't often brought to top of mind for them until it hits that enterprise stride. Other major takeaways I think are important is get relevant referrals. Before you buy technology that you're going to pull in-house, find someone of like a like-sized company that's had positive experiences with them and go through what were not positive about that experience, because most companies aren't going to tell you how complicated it is to integrate into your world, put serverlets on everyone's machines or, the interface to manage this content. You're pretty much guaranteed to have to hire someone from that company to operate this product if you're going to bring it in-house. You want to know those things up front because it adds to the investment into that product. It takes a long time to get things integrated, so those POCs to recognize what worked, what didn't work, and whether you like it or not are ultra important. And then, it's really important to know that they all take a lot of effort to maintain. Nothing is easy. Nothing integrates cleanly. It takes a long time to get it worked and tweaked and maintained and configured so it does what you want it to do, and that's why that documentation is just so important. So as a legal team, you know exactly what that product, how it functions, what it does, how it doesn't do, so you feel defensible about when you can get things done when you get tasked with a code red. One of my last comments really is there's new tech coming out. I think Eureka is a great product that drops servlets on everyone's machine and indexes those machines, so you can search across all your hosts if that's something you're interested in. TextIQ is new predictive technology that doesn't need to be trained. And then self-SaaS products are out there, and it's good for small things sometimes, but you have to sort of go through your own experience with them. I know they're talked about a lot, and people always ask whether they're good or not, and I honestly feel like you have to go through them and get referrals, find people who've actually used them and leveraged them, and see what their experience was. Some like them, some don't, some otherwise. But yeah, that's my.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say we sell the Total Discovery Engine a lot, which is a SaaS tool, and I'm not going to turn it into a commercial, but I do want to say that I've found that customers who go through a proof of concept, something as mission critical as an e-discovery solution like that, you shouldn't just ever jump into it. You should be doing proof of concepts and real proof of concepts. You want to make sure that you don't just have it and you jump in and do something, but mock a case up, mock a process, really go through it and put it through its paces. You're buying a piece of software that's going to either be a big solution and a big help to you, or an unbelievable annoyance. And it's so important to get as good of an understanding as you can. Even if you can, in the best case scenario, you could take a small case and run it through that, even in maybe parallel to a different case to your proof of concepts. My point is, the proof of concept phase, I think, is something that a lot of people don't do, or if they do, they don't truly put the effort into. But if you do that, if you've got a company who doesn't want to do a proof of concept, run away fast, because everybody who works worth their salt will do a proof of concept for you, and they should do it for free. And because the software will speak for itself. And so I highly, highly recommend that if you're looking for a solution like that. Look, if you're looking for a little tool to do something, a big proof of concept isn't necessary. But if you're looking for, either a behind the firewall or a SaaS solution that hits multiple points, then you want to make sure you do a very in-depth analysis, because once you get a system like that put in, and the better systems are going to be, have hooks into your like one of the things ours does, for example, is it hooks into your Active Directory, and you can automate your holds on email. When you put somebody on legal hold, it automatically talks to Exchange and puts their email on legal hold as well. The point of that is those integrations are not hard, but they're work, right? They're hopefully pretty easy. But once you have those types of integrations, you're going to be kind of stuck with whatever choice you made. And so I highly recommend that you go through all of that before.
It's never easy putting stuff on to preserve. That's why I just keep driving that home, that preservation across all your different systems. Some systems don't have any automated way to approach it.
Right, absolutely. Go ahead. I was going to say, you said in a lot of companies like Microsoft, especially with their whole Office 365 e-discovery suite thing, you're seeing a lot more of that. Google's doing some of it. You said Box is coming into it. And the better ones of those, and I'd say this, if you're looking at a solution like a Box or something like that for your company, or really any big enterprise solution, one of the questions you should ask yourself, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying a minute ago, is how do I get data out of this if I need to? And that's a question that should be part of any kind of enterprise adoption or software adoption, because you're going to have to eventually get data out. And that's not just for legal, it's for everything else. But anyway, I digress a little bit. I'm just saying, like, the proof of concept stuff, I think, is a really, really important point, and I think everybody should do that. At this point, I think we should probably stop and let Robin feed some questions to us. I think we've been answering some of the questions peppered throughout as we've gone along. But we're already a couple minutes over. Ben, I think you and I could stick around for a couple of minutes for whoever wants to continue, and we'll answer some of the questions as well.
If anyone wants to reach out to me via LinkedIn, I'm glad to take questions too. Ben Robbins on there.
Great. So Robin, you got some questions for us?
Yeah, y'all have picked them up on the way. I've got one that we didn't get to. Have you heard of anyone using their digital repository for e-discovery review and production?
I don't know if I understand it. What, like their digital repository? Like they're just doing it. It sounds like they're saying they're doing it manually.
I'm taking the question as reuse of the data matter over matter.
Yeah, that one's hard to say. To me, I read it as like, are you just using your like file share?
Oh.
And
yeah, I guess yeah, I would say it depends. Let's say,
no.
yeah, really. I mean, one of the things I caution against is using a system for e-discovery purposes that is not designed for that. And it's not because I'm trying to sell you discovery software, or I'm trying to tell you that you should go buy e-discovery software. I can tell you that in my experience, we've had clients who come in and are like, just print us out all the emails and we'll review them, or can't you just give me a PST? I'll open it in Outlook and go through and figure out what I want to do. Whatever situation, whether it's a repository or just throw, one of the things that you might be talking about is, okay, we've got Box. You know what? Do a search and copy all the relevant data to this folder, and we'll have somebody go through that folder, look at the documents, and decide which one should be produced. You're creating something ad hoc, and your defensibility is, the whole core of defensibility is, is it a repeatable, proven process? And look, in some cases, the one or two custodian case worth, thousands of dollars or tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars might be good enough for kind of a grassroots, seat of your pants approach. But it ends up being more expensive in the end. It really does. It doesn't sound like it does, because you're saying, well, then I got to go spend time on review tools and everything else. Well, if you call down the data to begin with, like Ben talked about, you can control those costs. And if you do it the right way, and especially if you have a process for it, and you do the same thing every time, and you can create that litigation repository inside of a litigation tool, then and you create so you can use that leverage, use the same knowledge over and over again, then you're going to find that it's cheaper than trying to use a document repository that's not designed for e-discovery. So hopefully we understood the question right. If not, hopefully the answers help somebody else there. But I think
this whole presentation was about bringing it in-house, doing it properly and defensively, not using a Windows file share, some sort of drive or box or something, because it just doesn't have the feature sets that are required to do everything that needs to be done well.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's almost an assumption that you're going to do that because, and I understand, I have complete sympathy for the person who may be working in a company who doesn't want to spend a dime on any kind of technology. And if you're stuck with that, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. But there is, and we help our customers do this a lot, is create ROIs showing, look, if you were to bring this in-house, here's where your savings are. And it's relatively easy to do that if somebody's not using any kind of litigation design tool. It's like, look, could I use my Outlook contact list to manage for my sales team to manage their calls and appointments and stuff? Sure. But if I go by Salesforce or one of the other CRMs that's designed, built for that process, I may spend more for it, but the ROI on it's going to be huge because now I can not only better, not only are my sales people going to be more effective, but the management and the process and the retention of that data and everything else is going to work much better as well. So anyway, long answer to a relatively short question, but I hope that we cast it the right way. Robin, do we have any other unanswered questions?
Not that you guys didn't get to, and with that, we're going to thank everyone who attended today. We appreciate your support of our webinar series with this year's theme, From the Corporate Perspective. We invite you to grab your lunch and join us on the third Thursday of every month at 1 Eastern. Next month, we're joined by Jeffrey Ritter, a professor at Oxford University, who will talk about building ROI for governance in the corporation. And months following that, we're going to talk about in-house legal analytics. I want to thank our speaker today, Ben Robbins of LinkedIn, and thank you, Brian. And we look forward to seeing you next month.